after our lovely words from our sponsors, we'll be going right into the opening speaking engagement here, Designing Staging Environments, a Blueprint for Pre-Production with Lucas DaCosta from ErgoMake. And not last but not least, how much does risk weigh in the DevOps ways of working with Dr. Shahram, all coming from Inflectra. And with that, it is my greatest pleasure to stop sharing. And Rick, you're first up.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't have any slides to share, but I just wanted to say a couple of quick words. But good evening, everyone. And thanks for joining us tonight. We're really happy to be a sponsor of this meetup. And I just love the way it's been set up. And I love the trivia in the beginning. That was great fun. Even though I came in dead, I think I came in second to last, I still had a good time, but that's all right. I just want to take a couple minutes to tell you a little bit about Inflectra. Talk about our mantra. So we help you deliver quality software faster and at lower risk. And I know that's a fancy marketing phrase that we put together, but what does that mean to most people? So essentially our tools are easy to implement and use. Our tools promote harmony across teams in the organization with full traceability. We integrate with about 75 different commercially available tools, and we enable you to track and mitigate any risks that might impact delivery, all seamlessly packaged into a single tool. So we love these. We love coming to these kind of events where people get together to learn and grow in their careers. And as a matter of fact, as Christina mentioned, we love events so much that we have our own. Coming up, an actual live event in the Washington, D.C. area from April 20th to the 21st. So it's InflectraCon, that's what it's called. And we're going to cover all kinds of topics near and dear to most testing professionals and their careers. So we're going to talk about things like risk analysis, agile testing and planning, DevOps, test automation, test and team management. We have some leadership sessions. We talk a little bit about requirements management, accessibility, and general QA and QE practices, as well as testing AI and ML. I know that there's been some things going on around about Microsoft Bing and ChatGPT, so that's kind of interesting. But also on the 19th, the day before the actual conference begins, we have our customer training. So if you're actually an existing user of Spira, you can get some additional training on the tool itself. So stay tuned. At the end of my colleague Shahram's talk on risk and DevOps, he will provide a code that will give you $75 off any of the tickets to InflectraCon. And I'm sure that if you have a team of folks, you can probably use that code across all of those team members. So if you'd like to take a look at the event program and the tickets that are available, go to www.inflectracon.com. And thanks for listening to me for this brief little few minutes, and I'll let you turn back to the reason why you're here, to hear some good content. And I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for that, Rick. And I was not aware of such a deep discount. So
yeah.
That's a lot.
$75 off.
Air fryer.
You can't beat that.
And for that from Rick and Inflectra, and for providing the prizes for this evening, as well as that awesome discount for the community here. And thank you. That was amazing. So with that, we have our official speaker, Lucas DaCosta, coming all the way from Brazil.
Thanks everyone. So let me get started sharing my screen, and then we can get started. So thanks everyone. Thanks Christina for the invite. Very, very happy to be here, and very happy to be talking to you about staging environments and how to make them better, how to use them to improve your processes. But just before we get to that, just thought I'd do a brief intro on myself. So I'm a founder at ErgoMake, and we deal quite heavily with these environments. We speak to lots of customers that have problems with their staging environments. And that's where all this content comes from. It's from firsthand experience with customers, seeing what people do and what works and what does not work. I've also written a book for many called Testing JavaScript Applications, which is right here. And I'm also a core maintainer of Chai.js and Silent.js, and do a couple of other open source stuff, including contributing to Jest as well. And before starting ErgoMake, I was a senior software engineer at Elastic. So let's get started. Without further ado, let's talk about staging environments. And to start, I'd like to explore why people use staging today and why these environments matter. So today, most people use staging for one of these three purposes. The first one is development. because individuals sometimes can't easily run their whole app on their machines. So they actually end up pointing to staging environments. That's especially true if you run anything on a JVM. As we all know, that's not that nice. So sometimes people just have to run lots of microservices or Kafka or maybe Elasticsearch, Kibana, a bunch of other stuff, and they cannot do that on their machines. The max CPU sometimes ends up just throttling things. It's just a nightmare. So what people do is they develop their own app on their machine, and they point to staging services, to staging queues or databases and that kind of stuff. So that's the first use of staging today. The second one is testing, because each UE and statics test needs to run somewhere, and the developer machine is usually not the ideal place to do so. So besides running on CI, sometimes you have them running against a staging environment, especially if you're doing synthetics. And also because sometimes the local environment may not be representative enough of a production environment. And finally, many people use staging mainly for validation, because non-technical folks like designers and product folks, they can't run their app on their machines. They cannot pull all the code, set it all up. So they need the code to be somewhere so they can run this validation. Usually that's staging, because they have a link to it and they can just click that link and test whatever's there. So the business impact of staging ends up being ensuring that features match the specs, so doing the acceptance test, more representative testing so that you can get to more reliable software so you can avoid issues being seen by your end users, and also sharing context among technical and non-technical team members, especially if you have designers, folks, and POs. Many of those folks in the team, they need somewhere to see these changes. Now, there are better ways to get all that than what we currently do. And before I get to actual solutions, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the problems and what we do today and what does not work. And first, on the left here, you can clearly see the excessive technical complexity, which leads to a lot of time so you can deploy things. Now, this complexity usually comes in the form of opaque CI pipelines or complex Helm charts or complex Terraform files and many other infrastructure tools that developers don't necessarily understand. And when that happens, when you have these complex pipelines, what happens is that developers end up depending on operations teams. Now, I know we've been talking about DevOps for a long time, but the truth is that many times developers just don't have enough time to spend learning all these technologies, learning how each of these pipelines work. So without empowering devs, we cannot get there. So what happens with the complex infrastructure is that developers can't spin up pre-production environments for themselves. Then they need to open a ticket, talk to ops, or they need to read a bunch of documentation on how to use a tool, and they still may not be able to use it because they don't have permissions to deploy things on the cloud or anything like that. And this dependency, it leads to a lot of wasted time, leads to long cycle times, and very often bugs, because the developers don't understand the underlying tooling and infrastructure. Now, another problem today is that most people have a single staging environment. And that may happen for many reasons. Maybe staging is too expensive, especially if it's too representative of production, or maybe it's just too complex to abuse. So you cannot on demand just spin up a brand new staging environment. And if that's the case, developers who write code pointing to staging, they end up not being to work properly if staging is down or misbehaving. So staging ends up just being a bottleneck, a single point of failure, if you just have one of it. Now, for designers, a problem with staging is that there's a lack of visibility into what's being done before changes are merged or deployed. But so because the designers cannot spin up things on their machines, they end up just seeing changes when they get to staging. And usually, when those changes get to staging, it means they have already been merged somewhere. Or maybe if you have a single stage environment, they're on the queue to get there so that the designer can see it. And then when feedback comes, it's usually too late or too expensive to change things. Now, for QAs, in addition to having to wait for the app to be deployed, just like designers have to, they often have to deal with messy data or a dirty state, which makes their tests unrepresentative of production. So they may not know whether a bug is there because you have a dirty state, because someone has been messing with the staging database, or because changes that were not meant to be deployed to staging have been deployed there and generated these dirty states. So messy data makes the QA job way more difficult as well. Now, finally, product managers may also have to wait for developers to deploy the change the PO needs to see. And when developers have to do that, they many times have to juggle these dependencies themselves. And if they merge, and one of these people here on the right disagrees with what should have emerged, especially if you don't have feature flags, then you end up with a broken state in main or an undesirable state in main sometimes, which leads to then your whole continuous deployment pipeline having to stop. Now, having seen all these problems and understood them, I wonder whether anyone has already thought of a few ways of solving them. Because I think many of these things that you will see here, they sound sometimes quite obvious, but many people don't actually implement them, especially as a whole. Because I think that if you implement these changes as a whole, it's a case in which 2 + 2 is not 4, it's more than that. And the first solution that I would recommend people implement is eliminating the bottleneck. So ending that one single staging environment and creating on-demand staging environments for each developer, so that developers don't have to juggle priorities between them, so that they don't incur the risk of breaking each other with conflicting changes or anything like that. And for you to be able to do that, of course, it's essential to have infra quotas and GitOps configured, but even more than that, it's essential to have good infrastructure abstraction for developers. So SREs and DevOps engineers, I don't really like the term DevOps engineer for obvious reasons, but these people, they need to create a good set of abstractions for developers to use. And these abstractions may sometimes even simplify the final environment you deploy, given it not always needs to match production. And for those abstractions to work, it's also important to embed an infrastructure expert into the team to provide support and empower developers, because just providing the abstractions may not be enough. No matter how simple you make it, it's important to empower those developers to be able to understand the infrastructure upon which their code is running. So with that, with those abstractions and with enough automation, you will be able to have multiple environments on demand. Now, something you're probably already thinking about is, okay, having too many environments sound expensive. And yes, it may be expensive, but that's why it's important to allocate a resource pool for teams. So those resource pools, they not only prevent you from worrying about excessive costs, but they also empower the team to use the resources however they find more useful. So you don't have to be wondering, is this team going to spend too much this month? No, you've already set a budget. And if the team needs to do something more specific, they don't need to ask for approval if it's within their budgets. So it's very important to do that. Many cloud providers will enable you to do that quite easily. And even if you go multi-cloud, you can use something like KubeSphere, which makes this quite easy with the simple code that you have here. You can just define some metering prices for teams to be able to use your underlying infrastructure, and they will be billed by the organization according to what they use. So that's quite easy to set up and quite important. And another way for you to save some money with these environments and enable them to actually be deployed is to remember that they don't necessarily have to be too similar to production. Depending on what you're doing, you can have lighter weight environments. Like when developers develop things on their machines, they many times don't have infrastructure that's exactly like they have on the cloud. They have a lighter weight environment, and that's good enough for development. So if your developers just cannot run things on their machines, or it's not convenient for them to do so, your development environment on the cloud does not have to have all those moving pieces. It can be simpler, and it can still enable fast development, fast prototyping, because then the designers, QAs, and everyone else can access it too. So be mindful of how similar you want these environments to be, depending on what you're doing. So if you're validating the product, for example, you probably just want to have some kind of performance equivalence so people know, okay, it's not too slow, it's just working fine. That's all you need for an accepting testing scenario. And you may only need infrastructure equivalence if you're doing some types of benchmarking or load testing or anything of that kind that depends specifically on representative infra. But if that's not the case, you can have lighter weight environments and save yourself some money with these. Now, another very important thing to do, especially to facilitate QAs to do their job properly, is to automate seeding and using clean states on these environments. So if you're able to automatically get the schema from production and then use a fake data generator to fulfill that schema with the necessary data, you will be able to have a clean slate for every new pre-production environment. And then you're going to be sure that, okay, this is working or not working, and it's not because of this messy state or this messy data. And another advantage of doing this is that it becomes much, much easier to test migrations, for example. So you don't have to risk anything with like having a dirty state on staging and then not knowing why things broke. Now, you can use something like Faker to do this. It's quite easy to hook it up with any small script that just figures out what each field in your database is and actually properly seed it with fake data. Now, empowering technical users is also essential because otherwise you won't get the full value of having multiple staging environments. And they're the only way to solve the late feedback problem. The only way is to shift left on their contribution. So remember I mentioned that the designers, QAs, and product managers usually just give feedback when it's too late. Well, if you give them a link, if you make it easier for them to access these environments, they'll be able to give feedback much earlier during the review stage. And then you can only merge code that's been validated, that's been seen by these people before you actually deploy. Now, if you use tools like Verso or Next.js, you can already do this. At Ergomake, this is exactly what we do, just with more representative infrastructure. And it's also important to remember that sometimes, depending on what data you have there, I always recommend you to use just fake data, but I don't know, maybe you have a new feature you don't want anyone to see. It's useful to put those behind an authentication barrier. And also, if you're building this yourself, remember to make these pages, these links, not crawlable. Otherwise, they'll get indexed and people might see these previews or be able to guess your link infrastructure if you're building it yourself. Now, another thing that people talk a lot when they talk about production environments is observability. Unfortunately, it doesn't get talked about enough when it comes to pre-production, but it's very important for you to have some type of alerting at least on these environments so that when your designer is testing something or when your PO is testing something or when you're just navigating around, you will be able to see, okay, I got an error here, or this thing didn't work properly. You know, these metrics are saying there's something wrong. So with these, you will be able to debug your pre-production environments much, much easier. Now, next, and we're almost at the end, I promise. It's very important for you to be able to run end-to-end tests and synthetics tests against these environments. So especially if you have synthetics tests, which are tests that run periodically against these live environments, it's very, very important for you to be able to have a stable environment in which they run. So it's a great thing to have one of these environments and have this automation beforehand, because otherwise you're going to depend on manual testing. And we know that that POs, that QAs, that other people, they don't always perform the exact same tests. So with these, you can run tests in parallel as well. So if you have multiple environments that you can spin up on demand, maybe you can break your end-to-end test suite, which takes an hour, into 4 batches against 4 environments. And if you run them in parallel, you would just save yourself a whole lot of time. So you run things in 15 minutes rather than an hour, for example. Now, just one final reminder, which is very, very important, is that all of this does not mean you can just eliminate feature flagging. It's important for you to be able to deploy things to a reliable environment and to be able to toggle feature flags so that different people can see different things. Now, it's always good to shift left on as many stages of the development lifecycle as possible, as I mentioned, but you should really focus on having a reliable production environment and feature flags to avoid this bottleneck. Because even if you have these environments so that people can validate and test things, if you just have to hold up merging them because, well, you don't know if you're going to break production or not, then you're not going to get as much benefit from them as you're going to get if you just use them for like development, for validation, for testing, without that being a bottleneck. So that's just something very, very important to do. This doesn't eliminate the need for feature flags at all. So finally, to summarize here, the key learnings. First one is to use the on-demand environments, not just one. Otherwise, you're going to have a bottleneck. To empower developers to spin up environments, as much as we talk about DevOps culture, it's not really a fact that most developers can do things themselves, that they understand the underlying infrastructure upon which their things run. So make sure to empower developers to be autonomous. manage resources on a team basis, give them budgets, give them autonomy, so that you don't have to worry about them going over budget or them being under budget and having to escalate whenever they need to use a new tool or when they need more resources to deploy their stuff. Use fresh copies of data for each environment. And I think I don't have to say you should eliminate all forms of PII in these environments, but it's always good to repeat that. Then make pre-production environments observable so that you know when things go wrong. Run periodic tests against these environments, especially synthetics tests. So have them always running there. It does no harm. And if you do E3 tests, you can parallelize them against multiple environments, because you're going to already have put up all the infrastructure you need for these environments to exist. And finally, create different profiles for pre-production, both lightweight and heavyweight, so that you don't spend money necessarily if you don't need your tests to be as representative of production. And finally, do not allow pre-production to become a bottleneck. You still have to use feature flags. You still have to have a reliable production environment to deploy things to. So that's pretty much it. If you do have questions, I'd be more than happy to go through those. We can also go into more depth on any of those topics. And if you want to chat, here on the left is my email, and here on the right is ErgoMake's website. We do quite a lot of that with preview environments. We're working on lots of new features for development environments as well. And if you just want to chat and hear from our experience what we've seen work well and what we've seen not work for people that do have pre-production environments, I'd be more than happy to chat as well. And that's pretty much it.
That was great. Love the visuals on there. I had a question. You mentioned very briefly the DevOps engineer title in general and your thoughts behind that. Could you care to elaborate what your thoughts are behind the title of DevOps engineer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't like the title DevOps engineer because it delegates that responsibility of like understanding the underlying infrastructure and taking care of it to a single person. And I think that's a team-wide responsibility. I think that, you know, the word DevOps, you know, started because of DevOps culture, not because of DevOps engineer. So the way I think about this is that you do have to have someone with a deeper infrastructure knowledge in the team, but that person's objective is to empower everyone else to be able to understand the underlying infrastructure and to understand how their code runs on that infrastructure. So having a single role to take care of that and saying you're the only person that understands infrastructure, I think it's too much responsibility, and it just creates bottlenecks because then everyone depends on that person. So I'm not saying, you know, infrastructure specialized infrastructure people should not exist or anything like that. I'm just saying developers need to understand the infrastructure upon which they run. The team needs to foster a DevOps culture, but it's still important for you to have that infrastructure person there as an enabler. Those are my thoughts on that title.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Lucas. And for those who are just tuning in, you might be catching the tail end of the first talk, but do not hesitate. We do have this entire event recorded that will be posted on our DevOps DC YouTube channel. Now, how long have you been in the industry, Lucas?
So as a software engineer for about 10 years, I think, something like that. And at ErgoMake, we just started last year, so just a few months on this product in particular. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
That was very good, Lucas. We should consider submitting a session for InflectorCon next year.
Oh, absolutely.
And with that, Lucas, if you don't mind putting your contact information in the chat for anybody to reach out to you offline, that way they can follow up and connect with you, of course, on LinkedIn. And again, if you have any questions for Lucas and you weren't able to answer it either on the Q&A or in the chat, which I don't see any questions in the chat, do not hesitate to reach out to Lucas or any one of our speakers and organizers if you would like to take that chat offline and go deeper into the topic itself.
With that, I would like to thank Christina in the meetup group, DevOps DC, for giving this opportunity here. A really great, wonderful presentation, Lucas. I really enjoyed it. And wish you all the best for everyone who is actually listening to this and gathering more information, because we are going to, you know, make a little bit of understanding in terms of the weight of a risk. And just to give you a little prelude here, I was doing a lot of agile transformations, and one of the agile transformation team basically said, oh, I'm so glad we are working on agile. We don't need to worry about risk. And that made me think like, okay, you're not avoiding risk in any shape or form. When you are doing the 2 weeks planning, the operation began 2 weeks iterations or 3 weeks or whatever it is that you are working on, that cadence is about limiting risks. And the very fact that we are missing that is one of the reasons why I started talking more about risks over here, and the weight of risk in DevOps is my, my focus over here. So with that, a little quick background about me. My name is Dr. Sriram Rajgopalan. I'm an enterprise agile evangelist with Infatra Corporation. I have my doctoral degrees in organizational leadership through project management, MBA, MS, Bachelor of Engineering, and I also do a lot of scholar practitioner work, trying to teach about some of these basic principles to even high school students. So I do a lot of other things. I won't go into the the alphabet soup of my certifications and stuff like that, because I only have 15 minutes. And when someone came and told me, Sriram, you're going to present in 15 minutes about risk, and I was wondering, like, 15 minutes, what can I do in 15 minutes for risk? And I was thinking of this Geico's message, if 15% can save you something on, life insurance, that's great. And I was thinking about the same thing. If 15% of listening to me is going to have the increased probability of your project success, 15% increased project probability of your success, I would like to take this chance right away. So that's the approach that I'm trying to uniquely address over here. Yes, I also have my one book published. It's called Organized Common Sense. I have it right here in front of me. It's talking about how some of the foundational project management principles are applicable in product management, product development, and every other way of our personal and professional lives. So with that being said, oftentimes I'm hearing the word risk in a bad connotation, like it's bad, let's avoid it, and things like that. But if you look at the basics of risks, from SWOT analysis, from VRIO analysis, and many other frameworks that exist for understanding risks, as well as from the portfolio program and project management literature, it's about both opportunities and threats. So positive risks and negative risks. So risk itself is not about what. We need to understand what it means to our product scope and our project scope. So it's all about perception. Risk is more about perception. So for the person who is actually lost in the sea, looking for a land, as soon as that person sees the land, it's like an opportunity. Oh my God, that's great. But by the same token, when you look at it from the other person's point of view, that person says, like, finally, I have somebody to talk to. Finally, I have somebody who I can, relate to, and, we can collaborate and problem solve and, stuff like that. So it's all about perception. So when we say risk is bad, somebody else may be thinking risk may be an opportunity. So your ability to create an intellectual property or patent or copyrights and, things like that is going to be an opportunity. Right? And the way you are trying to do your stuff is going to be an opportunity as well. So it's not always bad. It's all about how you perceive risks to be. At the end of the day, both these two gentlemen here, the person marooned on the island, as well as the person who is on the board, have to work together to find out how we never give up and finally find the actual solutions. One solution may not work. They have to iterate and iterate and iterate until they are able to get out of this island and get to the mainland. So it's all about the perception, and not a single industry and not a single project is immune from risks. Whether we are using DevOps framework or Agile framework or Kanban framework or whatever Scrum or whatever approach that we are basically doing, it doesn't mean that we are actually going to avoid risk in the end at all. So we need to start looking into risks and factoring how we can avoid that. Now, some of the DASA principles, the DevOps and Agile Skills Association has their own principles, and some of the simple principles are customer-centric action. Now, you are basically trying to find out who the customers are. And many times, even in a DevOps culture, when people are using this information, I go and ask them, who is your end customer? And no, they're not able to answer that question, like, who is my end customer? Well, the paying customer, the actual end user, how are we addressing that? So we need to start thinking in terms of the persona here very clearly. And with that, we have to create the solutions in mind. So how are we actually delivering constant value to the end user through the paying client by the frameworks that we are adopting, right? And as a result, if you caught the last the discussion between Christina and Lucas, there was a discussion about why are we not talking about DevOps SRE as an engineering role, and he was mentioning like it's a single person responsibility. That's not the way it is to it's a team's responsibility. In my simple mind, I consider team itself as an acronym. Together, everyone achieves more. So it's not like one person who is actually doing the work, it's collectively coming together and making a team level commitment to do the work. That's the idea, we can shift left and shift right so that, we are basically seeing each other. It's no longer the man, my code works fine, but it's your problem. No, it's my machine that is really working fine. It's your code that is a problem. So we don't want that kind of an interaction, but instead we support each other, we collaborate with each other. And that's the end-to-end responsibility. That is a value equation. Now, when you look at that, the cross-functional autonomous team, what does that mean? We need to have multidisciplinary skills to be able to look at other things. Example, test-driven development, that itself is a risk management discipline. The continuous improvement, when you're looking at how we are looking at how to improve things better, more, cheaper, faster, and still like that, you are looking at continuous improvement. The idea of just because it has not broken, let's not look into that is not the approach that we want to take. If it's working, if it's taking 3 minutes to do the work, how can we do it better? So ultimately, we focus on automating everything we can. Excuse me. So that's the idea behind that. Now, when you look at that, I say the top 3 things are the value drivers. I'm sorry, I'm coming off of a little bit of a cold, so sorry about that. So the top 3 things are the value drivers. So if those things are a part of quality, if value is a function of quality, to me, quality is a function of risks. If you do not take care of risks, you're not taking care of quality. If you do not take care of quality, you simply do not deliver value. So I have a few polls that I would like to use to actually drive the discussion here. So let me launch the first poll here. So let's do the first poll. Are you able to see the poll showing up?
Yep, we can see it. And this is for all of the participants to be able to use. I think anyone that is a panelist is unable to.
Right. So I'd like to, maybe give a minute for people to respond. The counter is running there.
And to those who might be away from your phone and you want to hear what this poll is, if you don't mind, Dr. Sharma, I'll just say it out loud.
Sure.
What was introduced to automate the risk of failing application performance due to unexpected loss of dependent services interruptions? Option A, web application firewall. Option B, code development guidelines. Option C, chaos monkey. And option D, document security policies.
Good. Very good. Thank you for repeating that. I'll try to remember to repeat that next time.
No worries, no worries.
All right, we are about a minute past here, so I'm going to end the poll here. So the poll results are this, 2 out of 11 people, 18% have responded web application firewall, code development guidelines 18%, but most of the people picked chaos monkey. And chaos monkey is the right answer. The idea behind Netflix introducing the chaos monkey is primarily for any known issue that could potentially become a major problem, or an unknown issue that could, impact our product, our actual products and services and stuff like that. So the key here is the dependent service. And if you recall, Lucas' presentation, he was talking about dependency. Dependency is a risk. So how do you actually address that? So the more you are able to think through that, the better. And that's the idea behind Chaos Monkey, because anybody can go around and pull the plugs in any different directions. And are you able to actually deliver the work? Web application firewall is actually allowing us to apply some policies, documented security policies, so that you can block some people. And the example is a Zoom that we are talking about. Like, we don't want Zoom bombers here and stuff like that. And code development guidelines are an example of how you are going to hold your process moving from one pipeline to the another pipeline, but not talking about the different service interruptions as much as Chaos Monkey concept is. So those are something that we want to keep in mind as we are looking at this. With that, I will share my second poll here. Let me go around. Okay. All right. Okay. Go back. Launch. I hope you are able to see my second poll that is launching. I will try to read that out.
Oh,
this is about vulnerability deployment. Which of the following addresses risks arising from poor code configuration management leading to vulnerable deployment? The answer choices are vulnerability scanning, identity and access management, CI/CD services, code coverage. Just so that anyone asks me this question, these are polls as part of the presentation and do not come with any $50 Amazon gift cards.
Thank you for clarifying that, Dr. Shah.
All right, we have about a minute here, so I'm going to stop the poll. I'll share the results. All right, so 77% of the audience picked us vulnerability scanning, 8% across all the other three answer choices. And here is where the thought process comes into picture here. We want to eliminate the bottleneck. This is something that even Lucas was mentioning. And elimination of the actual challenges is a risk response strategy. So when you are looking at vulnerability scanning, you are evaluating what are all the potential things that could go wrong in this automated code deployment that has been done. So you're not looking at code coverage. You're not looking at, am I moving from this build to that build? Am I, bringing the right one and stuff like that? But you are getting more into what kind of a configuration management I am having that could actually create a problem in my environments. So when you are moving from QA environment to staging environment, you're talking exactly about that. From staging to pre-production, when we're talking about that the staging and introduction of these different environments itself is an example of risk mitigation strategy.
Pardon me, Dr. Shram, are you needing to share the Zoom web page right now?
I thought I was sharing it. Hold on. I thought I was sharing it already.
I see poll number 1 now. I think I see your slides now.
Okay. I think when I launched the second poll, it stopped it, I guess. Okay, I will remember that. Okay, cool. Listen, we are actually learning as we go over here, risk response strategies as we hear. So now let me stop this, go back, and I'm going to launch the third one right now.
And I think on the slides, it just says poll number 1.
Yeah, I was not trying to move. Yeah, that's right. Okay, cool. Let me move
Nice.
to the polls 1, 2, 3. All right, okay.
Thank you.
Cool. Fantastic. So let me repeat the question here. This is about cost of quality. Which quality management practice reduces risks from ambiguous requirements and inadequate testing? The answer choices are prevention costs, appraisal costs, internal failure, and external failure. All right, the poll, I'm going to end the poll. It's about a minute past here. So let's end this. So about 60% of the members mentioned prevention costs, and the remaining talked about appraisal and internal failure. Fortunately, nobody talked about external failure over here. So let's talk about the cost of quality in real simple terms. Cost of quality is about cost of conformance and cost of non-conformance. Cost of conformance is also called cost of good quality, and the cost of non-conformance is called cost of bad quality. Now, in the cost of conformance, we talk about two important things, which is like, now, how do I prevent a mistake before it even happens? That is thinking about what can potentially go wrong so that we have some proactive preventive steps. I believe in what I call as a 6P principle. It's called proper proactive planning prevents poor performance. Now, that is exactly what preventive cost is. So trying to make sure that there is enough time to do the testing. What's the idea behind having a wonderfully written test case that you are not able to have enough time to test? Or what's the idea behind automation that you are not able to maintain on an ongoing basis? Now, these are prevention costs. Just because you can automate does not necessarily mean that you need to automate. And just because it is automated does not necessarily mean that you can forget about it. Right? So prevention cost is talking about those training that needs to be given, documentation that needs to be kept up to date or reviewed in the right time, and giving enough time for people to do their work. If those things are not done, then you're not ensuring quality. These prevention costs are part of quality assurance. Quality assurance is more proactive and process oriented. Quality control, which involves testing, correcting, catching mistakes and fixing them and stuff like that, that is part of being reactive and product oriented. This is one of the reasons why I question, some of the thought process behind the Agile Manifesto. When people say individuals and interactions over processes and tools, we didn't say anything on the right-hand side is not required at all. We do need them. We want to bring them at appropriate point in time. That is the expectation of the multidisciplinary skill set that we expect on people. It's exactly what we are talking in shift left. Excuse me. All right, let me move on to the next one. I'm going to do.
Dr. Shram, I only see poll number 3 as the image.
Yes, I am moving.
Oh, okay, perfect. Sorry.
I'm moving this out. Launching the poll.
There's always so many windows to move around.
I know. Okay, I'm launching the poll here. I hope you are able to see the poll 4.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So this is again about cost of quality and DevOps cycle. When reducing the cost of quality, at what DevOps stage should we address this more proactively? All right, about a minute past here. I'm going to stop the poll here. All right, here 90% mentioned plan, 10% mentioned test. No one said deploy and monitor. The keyword in my question is more proactively. The cost of correcting a mistake at the early stage is always going to be small. We were talking in the previous presentation that Lucas was giving. Yeah, the cost of getting a staging environment, there is going to be a cost for that. Well, either you pay a small cost at the beginning or you pay a large cost for the escape defects, which is good. You always want to go with the planning, because the early stages where you are able to come back and say, what's the value position here? How am I going to identify the risks? And what risks will actually make sure that this project does not go fine, because this requirement is not going to be properly tested, or we will not be able to properly validate this. Those kind of risk-driven thinking has to happen at the early stages. Every feature, every user story that you are writing should be actually associated with the risk. If not, we are not able to move forward. So the more important thing is about planning. So the earlier we are able to address these things, the better. And in fact, if you think about the design thinking talks about, how do I discover and design ideas much in advance before I even start coming up with the actual user stories that will be feeding into the user stories, into the backlog. So discover, design, deliver, and deploy. That's the approach behind even design thinking. So the first diamond, when it converges, and it's a planning stage. So planning is where we want to address all the risks. And the idea behind spikes, experiments, all those things is primarily to go through the backlog refinement stages to get to where we need to be. After that, you have a lot of testing, the quality control testing, the exploratory testing, and many other types of testing will come into play. But the most important thing is planning. All right, so let me remove my polls. I have 4 polls. So one of my experience speaks that I always mention is whenever you are looking at some things, make sure that you are looking at these feasibilities. The technical feasibility is more about, can we do it? The next one is more about, we have done something. Now that's into the production environment. Can we sustain that? Because if we cannot sustain that, then we are not getting business benefit. And as a result, we are not going to get value for the customer. The next one is, can we afford it? This can be done in 3 months, in 1 year, in 2 years. But, as you are continuously, supporting this product, you may have to start spending some time on what functionality should I retire? And how do I make sure that the automated scripts are still working the way that they are meant to be? And those kind of thought process have to continuously be in place. And this is one thing that I created, what I call as a toe principle. Tap your toe on your value delivery. So are you able to constantly think in terms of the technical feasibility, operational feasibility, and environmental feasibility all at the same time at the early stages of your project? For every user story that you are having, are you able to think these 3 elements at a minimum? If you are not, well, maybe you are allowing escape defects to go into play. And I'm not saying you need to have a solution and answer and things like that, but at least have you thought about this? And that's the idea behind risks. If you can think about it, you can actually address that. And which brings my final message is risk management is everyone's responsibility. It's not the product owner, it's not the architect, it's not the agile coach or scrum master or the project manager or the DevOps engineer. It's everybody's responsibility. If we don't practice that, if we don't understand that, then we are going to be losing on the ultimate thing, which is the product increment producing a value. Okay. Now, my colleague Rick talked about, discount code, and here is where the most important discount code comes into play. I'm sure you would like to know more about many things that we have talked about: agile testing, AI, ML, requirements management, test case management, product training, and many other things. So this is the code, icon 23 event. This will help you save $75 with the promo code. It's a lot better than $15 savings from Geico's 15% message. It's a lot better. $75, and I'm like the Allstate going says, your satisfaction will be guaranteed. So I request that people actually check it out. It does expire on February 28th, as it is mentioned over here. So I request that people immediately go and check it out as well. With that, I would like to thank again, Christina, for your opportunity to present here. But I have my contact information, sriram@inflectra.com, Twitter, and my actual website, sriram.rajgopalan.com. If there is any questions, please reach out to me. Thank you.
Wonderful. And don't worry about it, Dr. Shram. Awesome. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. However, if you guys feel so inclined, please put your questions in the chat. Any questions for Dr. Shram or Lucas? If you have any questions, if you are unable to announce it here in chat, please do not hesitate to reach out to our speakers and connect with them online and continue those conversations. Both were very different topics, and coming from a person who's not a deep dive technologist like that, I certainly learned a lot sitting here. So thank you for the wonderful content and great visuals. Great visuals.